understood pretty quickly that you didn't need to know everything about the machine, didn't need to know everything about the solutions. You just needed to know how to get to the right people. Being top of mind is super important, right? Like being top of mind when they're ready to do something is obviously the key. It's very simple, but it's hard to keep doing it and be disciplined. Making sure that whenever they think about something new or whatever they're going to do on the existing opportunity, I'm the one they talk to about it. I think trust is the number one differentiator between just being transactional and strategic, right? They trust you to share secrets about the business. I can't tell you how many times I hear executives say I shouldn't be telling you this, but
Welcome everyone to this month's Fireside Chat. This is actually one of my favorite episodes, and we haven't even recorded yet because I'm sitting across from my best friend Theo Gottschalk, who I've known for 35 years. How long has it been, Theo?
yeah, I think it's about 35 now. Crazy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Since middle school, since high school, we had a very similar trajectory. We both started in copier sales and then transitioned into tech. And him and I hang out a lot. And I've kind of witnessed his evolution, his growth over the years. And now he's one of the top performers at AWS. And this conversation's been a long time coming. So let me give you guys a little background on Theo. He is one of the top 5 producers in the automotive and manufacturing team in North America at AWS. He's been in sales for over 20 years, and he moved into tech sales about 11 years ago after selling copiers the first 9 years. His numbers have gotten better and better and better every year at AWS, and this year is his best yet. He's going to do over 35 million in contracts, which represents 42% growth in the territory. And for those of you who might be thinking, well, AWS is growing a lot, AWS is only growing 19%. So he's more than double the pace of what AWS is doing as an organization. That is a huge, massive number for any business, license or consumption. So he's hit quota every year for 5 years in a row. And like I said, I've seen him grow professionally, personally, and I could not be happier for him. And so what we're going to do today is dive into what Theo's journey looks like from going from a more transactional type seller to a more strategic seller, and really just have a straight conversation about what it takes to reach the top of the sales game, the strategic selling game. So welcome, brother. Great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Cool. So why don't you give people some background? I know in college you were studying art history and you went to the Academy of Art in San Francisco afterwards and then made a full pivot into sales. Curious kind of how that happened.
Sure. And then, by the way, can I bring you to all my meetings from now on to do that introduction? That was pretty awesome.
You can.
Yeah. So
Anytime.
I grew up in LA, went to UCSB, University of California, Santa Barbara. Didn't know what I wanted to do at all. Kind of drifted into art history. After 2 years, you have to declare a major, and that was what I had the most credits in. So I chose it. Very strategic. And got that degree. After that, I moved to the Bay Area because I had the opportunity to kind of go to a new area, wouldn't have any friends, could kind of make my way and kind of think on my feet. So that was a good opportunity to kind of really find myself and figure out what I wanted to do. I had no idea what I wanted to do after college. Um, I was working at Kinko's, which is FedEx office these days, really on an upward career trajectory with that. And one night, a guy came in from Konica Minolta, which is a copier company, if you guys don't know. And I helped him with something. He was impressed by what I did or the way I carried myself, whatever it was. And I got an interview with them to be a sales support, like kind of an engineer. And so I was going on calls with them. I got the job, going on calls with them for about 7 months. And I realized that in that trajectory as like an engineer or maybe even a person that was doing art, kind of had a limited upside potential as far as income. I'd be usually a salary-based employee, that kind of thing, unless I started my own business. And I was going out with sales reps and I was talking to them like, what are you guys making on these deals? And like, I learned that they were making, six, seven, not seven figures at the time, but pretty like mid six figures. And they were selling copiers. I'm like, are you kidding me? Is that even possible? And I was realizing, like watching them operate, that there wasn't any magic to it. It was just about activity, meeting with the right people that made decisions, qualifying, in or out quickly. And so I asked to take a sales role, and I was given one, but I had a 20K salary, so I was pretty scared being a
I
22.
started at 22K at Lanier, so I
Yeah, yeah,
totally.
similar. Yeah, right, yeah. So I came in like I was like, I have to perform. I have to do whatever it takes to make this work. I'm on my own now. And so fortunately, I had a good mentor in the branch's general manager. And he said, the number one thing you need to focus on is activity, right? Just talk to a ton of people. That'll give you a pipeline, right? Which will give you meetings, which will give you deals. So I learned all the transactional like best practices at that time. And luckily, I followed him and really just focused on that. I understood pretty quickly that you didn't need to know everything about the machine, didn't need to know everything about the solutions. You just needed to know how to get to the right people, right? And have those discussions. And that would lead ultimately to deals. And so I knew by doing a lot of activity, I would get better a lot faster. So I remember my first day as a salesperson, I did like 150 calls. I just had this list and I was just dialing through it, smiling and dialing, hearing no, hearing whatever. And the rest of the sales pit that I was in was just like, what are you doing? Why are you making so many calls? Like, no one does that. I'm like, well, I'm scared shitless. Sorry, excuse my French.
Good. You can say
But
shit.
I have to make money, and I have no idea what I'm doing, so I might as well just do a ton of calls. And before long, my first year, I made the trip within 6 months. I was making six figures as a 24-year-old. Like, all right, maybe this is going to work out. And so that's kind of how I got into sales.
So talk to people just for context, like what did you learn in those early days that serves you now, maybe with grit or work ethic or just dealing with rejection? Like that's a lot of activity. How is that serving you in your role as a strategic seller, those early days, if you think about it?
I think the combination of the activity of being organized with follow up. Follow up was a big one too, right? Like you go and meet these people, you need to make sure you're doing what you say you're going to do. This is all very simple and easy to understand, but having the discipline to do that day in and day out, right? Recording things properly, bringing your team along so they understand what you're doing as well in these opportunities and how the deal is going to get done. So I think just doing the activity, being organized with it, being able to qualify in and out quickly, right? Know who's a prospect, who's actually going to buy something, who's going to go to a demo, who's going to actually execute. Understanding those details as fast as possible and being organized about the follow up with it. I think that still transfers over to strategic sales, right? Because you have these long sales cycles, much larger deals. If you're not organized and you can't tell the story of why we're working with this customer to a larger team that you're carrying with you, right, as a quarterback,
Mhm.
I think that served me well in my whole 21 years in sales, just understanding that you need to have those core tenets to make things work and act and be seen as professional to the customer where they have the trust in you to do business.
I'm remembering when we worked together at Rico, because he came out after Conic Minolta, went over to Rico, moved to SoCal. I'm remembering, I don't know if it was a folder system or what you had, but you had like a follow-up where you would literally move people. I think it was before like Google Calendar, but you had such a thorough follow-up system, and you still do, frankly. Theo's the guy that
Yeah.
like,
Now it just goes in here, right? But it's the same thing. I've just carried that over from like writing stuff down or
what
having
was
like a
that though?
file
What was
system.
that original system? Can you share kind of like the next step? Did you just move them like on
Yeah.
the
So like let's say I had a call with someone, they're like, you know what, we're not interested right now. And then I would probe a little deeper, like, what is the timeline for this? When does your current lease come up? This is with copiers.
yeah.
And then I would just file it half of that time, right? I don't want to take their word for it that it was going to be a year until they're going to make a decision. I wanted to cut that in half to make sure I got ahead of any competitor that got in there, et cetera. So I would just religiously stick to that. And
Mhm.
then every Monday I would make calls. The rest of the week I'd have appointments. So just keeping that same rigor, I think was key.
Yeah, I think for everyone that's not unique to transactional. The ability, just because someone's not interested, doesn't mean that they're not really interested. It means they're busy and it's not a priority right now. What Theo did, I've seen it, is just like constantly follow up. So they say it takes 8 to 12 touch points to actually book a meeting, and you actually were doing that. So when there was interest or when maybe they're thinking about it, you were there. It's not on them to reach out to you. It's on you to reach out to them. I think it's a
Yeah, and that's really carried over to strategic as well, right? Being top of mind is super important, right? And I'll get to this later when we talk about executives, but like being top of mind when they're ready to do something is obviously the key. It's very simple, but it's hard to keep doing it and be disciplined. So I have one-on-ones with all my executives, right? Making sure that whenever they think about something new or whatever they're going to do on the existing opportunity, I'm the one they talk to about it. So I think
Yeah.
that
So
just
while we're
pretty
on that, since we're on the topic, like how do you stay top of mind without annoying executives so they're not just like following up? Like what is your cadence for having like a regular one-on-one with them, how frequent and like what's on the agenda when you're doing it. So it's not like more of the same thing that you were talking to them about yesterday.
I've definitely gotten a lot better at that. And I was pretty much a bull in a china shop for the first 5 or 6 years, right? And I would annoy people for sure. But I've gotten more nuanced, right? And I'll try to couch it with a reason why I'm reaching back out. Maybe there's an event coming up. Hey, by the way, let's touch base on that thing that we're working on. Or I'll hear something in another meeting, right? I'll be listening for like developments with the business that might affect the deal, or maybe there's an acquisition that I hear about that's coming up, or maybe there's a divestiture that's going to happen with the business that might affect things. So I will text the exec immediately, like, hey, I heard something. Can we talk? And I'm at the point with these relationships where I can do that, and they usually respond, and we can talk later that week or the next week, just one on one.
Mhm.
And then I bring the whole team along with me, like, hey, this is happening. How does that affect this engagement that we're working on? So
Mm.
that's and just every month with the key executives doing that in each of my accounts.
It's almost like you're an employee in their account and you're updating them on what's going on, not only with your team, but what other things you're hearing. And so you're always in their ear with that text messaging. And
Yeah,
it's
my boss calls me the swarmer because like we're always swarming each part of the business about something that we can do to help, right? So we're like, and I get my other like people on the team to go after like, hey, let's go look at that business unit about whatever use case, or this might be interesting to this business unit. But I deploy the whole team, and we're just in their face so much with value that
Mhm.
we're the first ones they think about when they're ready to do something.
How do you define value in their face with value?
Bringing them something, a new idea or a new way to approach a problem that we're seeing in other customers in the same industry.
Mm,
Hey, we've seen with XYZ company, this is happening. We thought it might be interesting. We thought you might be coming up against the same problem. We thought you might be preparing for the same kind of thing. Let's
mm.
get ahead of it and at least talk about it now, right? It could be just totally high level, but let's at least begin to approach it, see where it fits in your timeline, right? And
Yeah.
then begin to work from there.
Again, it's like you're an employee of their company. You're always looking out for things that are going to serve them. You're always looking out for new developments, new ideas, and you're finding, when other customers, big customers in their industry are doing something, you're getting that information so they can stay relevant, so they can stay top of mind. So
It even goes down to reading LA Business Journal every week and reading everything in the Business Journal, regardless of industry or what it is, because I can find something in those topics that I can relate to my customer and say, "Hey, look, I saw this." I've sent pictures to executives like, "Hey, I saw this. Can we chat about it on Monday?" So
yeah.
it's just always like thinking about, you know, things that are happening in macro and then applying it to their business.
It's mindset. It's being a trusted advisor. So let's talk. We're kind of already getting into it, but you spent a lot of time doing transactional sales, and now you're really like the epitome of a strategic seller, a partner. You have great relationship with C-suite executives in your accounts. You've grown them. They trust you. How would you, a lot of people on this call and listening are trying to make that transition from transactional to more strategic seller. How would you define kind of the difference, having lived in both worlds for a long time?
I think we always say start at the top and work on being a trusted advisor, right? It's very cliche, but it is very true. I think establishing credibility as soon as possible to build that trust. I think trust is the number one differentiator between just being transactional and strategic, right? They trust you with your opinion about everything. They trust you to share secrets about the business. I can't tell you how many times I hear executives say, I shouldn't be telling you this, but because we've reached that status where, we're very transparent with each other. So I think that's the main difference. Like in transactional, you're working towards, a month end, a quarter end, right? And then they hear that the next quarter. They're like, well, you told me that last quarter. And like in transactional sales, you're coaching them that there's always going to be a deal. So like, why do they even believe you this time? So I think that's the main difference is that trust that you get to be more of a strategic partner.
Okay, so I hear in transactional sales, you're chasing a deal, and that's the goal. In strategic sales, you're chasing a what? What are you chasing for the customer? What do you,
A business outcome,
okay.
right? It's going to either drive revenue, it's going to add an expansion opportunity to them. It's going to help them be more of a strategic player in their industry. It's going to allow them to open up a new way of selling products. So like just what's that business outcome that's really going to be like a 5 or 10 year massive goal for them, and then working backwards to figuring out what that is. And that's a lot more exciting for the executives to talk about than just like buying 10 seats of something, right? So it's you know, finding out what that big thing is that's really on their mind, which they won't share with everybody, right?
So let's kind of understand that. Is that something you ask? Like the first, I'm gonna go back a little bit because now you have these relationships and you're trusted already.
I
But
know it's a little easier now. Yeah.
it's easier now because you've had some of the same accounts. But when you started, were you asking? Oh, actually, before you even go there, like what are the top things you want to learn when you're meeting with the CIO, a CTO, a COO, any executive, CFO, doesn't matter. What are the top things you're trying to uncover in those conversations with executives specifically?
So I will in these first meetings, like in my first year, I had greenfield, so I had like half customers that weren't or people that weren't doing anything with AWS, and half that were customers, but usually to a small degree.
Yep.
And so in these, I would go to all the ones that were not customers and go right to the C-suite, usually CIO, right? Because we are technology, but or I'd
Yep.
go to the chief revenue officer, right, for new product development, things like that, or I'd go to operations. But I go right to that C-suite and I write an email and I'd say, hey, here's what we're doing in the same industry. Here's some use cases. And to that first meeting, I would bring, a resource that could speak that language. And I would also get more versed myself. But bring a resource, knowing the right person to bring to that first meeting that can actually speak the language, obviously can establish a lot more credibility. I know some companies don't have those types of resources. We're fortunate to have those here, but I know like Salesforce has that. I know other large companies do, Microsoft, Google, etc. So make sure you bring those resources and insist on it. Like I would go right to them and say, hey, look, I have this meeting that has this potential with this executive. I really need you to join me because we need to establish credibility out of the gate. And that
Mhm.
would be how I would approach new customers in the beginning.
So you're coming with a point of view on how and where you can make the biggest impact based on what you've done with similar customers.
Correct.
Okay. And you share that, and then you pivot to discovery. And what if that point of view isn't relevant, or what typically happens when
Well,
you're bringing in something that is outside of them and what they're doing? How do you pivot to finding out what's important to them?
yeah, we would set up the meeting with the point of view of something, but we would open it up by saying, "Hey, look, we think we have maybe a match here because of these areas that we've worked with other customers around. But we want to hear from you. Like, what were you thinking when we reached out, right? What were you thinking when AWS came to talk to you? What is your experience, or do you have any? Just get them talking. So the goal is to get them talking for at least 10 to 15 minutes before we do anything,
Mm,
right? And then they could say, you know what? I just wanted to know more about the cloud or some generic response, right? So then we would probably go into our hypothesis of what we thought they might be interested in. But the goal is to just get them talking, obviously, in that first meeting, and then we could decide where to go with it. But we would come with a point of view, and we
It's
would share
funny.
that.
It's funny because we're literally in the middle of this module called Impactful Executive Conversations, which is
Yeah,
why I thought this conversation is so timely. And I said verbatim the same thing. Come with your point of view, share what you want to cover, and then before you get into it, ask what are
yeah,
you hoping to get? What's the reason
yeah,
you did the meeting?
yeah, yeah.
And
None of what I share is going to matter if your idea of what you want to do as a business is not matching what we think. So let's
yeah.
make sure we get that out first.
Well, it's coming in with a curiosity and not being assumptive and not being arrogant, like we know best. It's like, hey, we think we can help you in some areas, but it could be totally off. Love to hear kind of what you're hoping to get out, what your understanding is before we dive in, so we can
That's
make
right.
this
Yeah, yeah.
meeting
And,
impactful.
and then yeah, and then what does success look like for you in this meeting? Like, and where are you trying to go, like personally, that we can maybe help enable, right? And
Yeah.
just get them going. And yeah, kind of be a little like reverse psychology, like, hey, we're not a fit for everybody. It might not be the best solution set for you, but we have an idea that might be useful, but let's hear it from you first.
Mhm. So one of the things that I think is interesting is this concept of no pressure. The way you're kind of talking is, a lot of people put a lot of skin in that meeting. They put big skin in the game going into the meeting. But you told me when we were kind of prepping for this, like, I don't care if they do the deal or not. I really don't. I'm detached. And I think that's really hard for people. And I'd love to kind of get inside your head a little bit on what you mean by you're detached and how does that allow you to show up and how do you even show up that way, knowing you got a big quota, you got big goals, and these meetings are pretty important with senior executives.
I'm fortunate to have the relationships that I have at this point, so maybe I'm a little more that way than I was. But even from the outset here, knowing I have a company like this, behind me and I have these resources, which I know most of these big companies that are in tech do have, you kind of have to say, look, you know what? We're trying to help you here. We have the ability to do that, to really solve whatever large problem you have, and we need to, work on it in a certain way. But if it isn't the right time, if you're not the right audience, if you have a other preference, then maybe we do this later. And I find that like putting that out there in the beginning of it, it's just not what they expect to hear, right? Because we come in like, oh, have you seen this new product? Or, we're as salespeople, we want to talk, we want to share, we want to position, right? But
Mhm.
kind of having that, like, you know what, this may not be like in the very beginning of the intro of the meeting, like we may have something that works here. We may have a view that fits what your perspective is, but we may not. And then we can find a better time to do that. And then just more talking points like that, where we're kind of giving the view that, hey, you know what, we don't really need this business. We want to help you, but we don't need it. I don't know. It works more at a large company like where I am, to be
I
honest.
think
But
it works, period. I don't
yeah,
think it has to do with, I think it's a psychology principle. I think the person that cares the least wins the most.
and I do care deeply. I want to win everything.
I know you do, but that's
So
the irony is that
yeah,
you do
yeah,
and you don't. You care internally for your own goals and your financial
yeah.
pursuits, and because of who you are. Theo's a strong Enneagram 8 like me. He's a strong challenger, so we can butt heads sometimes if if you can imagine. But fundamentally, I mean, competitive, like competitive football, competitive baseball. He usually beats me at everything, but I give him a run.
Still get me in pool all the time.
I'll beat you at pool, ping pong recently too. Fundamentally, though, I know you care, but when you show up in service of them and making sure that the intention and the focus is on them and helping them without caring about whether or not they do business with you, it allows you to show up free in true service. I'm curious kind of how you've been received showing
Yeah.
up this way versus the bulldog that you used to be and like pushy in some ways, you know?
Yeah, I think that goes to the like getting in the weeds with technology, right? And sometimes a conversation will start to go that way, even in these first meetings with execs. And I try to push back on that and say, hey, look, we can totally get to that. Obviously, we're a tech company. We have over 250 services. We probably have something that's going to work for whatever we're doing. But unless we understand that reason why we're even here, it's not going to matter, right? We're not going to like going into a workshop about a service is not going to do anything if we don't find the big enough problem that's going to really move your business forward, right? So we have to push back on that a lot because they do want to go into the services a lot. And I have team members that start talking about service. Oh, hey, we have this service that can do that. Let's slow down a little bit, right? And let's wait to have that meeting, and we can definitely do that. But let's understand in as much detail as possible what the business problem is.
And how is it received when you say, no, we're not going to show you what you want to hear. We're not going to go dive in because we want to learn more about your business. Generally, like what's the reception when you use that approach with your customers?
It could be mixed, right? They could be frustrated because maybe they came to the meeting with the impression that they would hear about a service or see some slides, right?
Yeah.
But we say, hey, look, let's parking lot that. Let's make that a follow-up. I'll bring these people to that meeting that are experts in those areas, right? So they can dive a lot deeper than we can. But
Mhm.
today we really wanted to understand like why we're even doing this.
So this is a good transition for everyone. So for everyone listening, Theo is a core rep or a strategic director, right? Overseeing the entire line of products and services that Amazon, similar to a core rep at a Salesforce or Oracle or SAP. So he's got the whole fleet versus a point solution. How do you think about your role as a quarterback, as a core rep? What is your ultimate job responsibility in that role?
It's to establish that executive alignment around what we're trying to do for their business within 5 or 10 years, right? So we leverage programs like executive briefings, et cetera, to set that vision. Like, what is that statement? Like, where the company wants to be. Like, XYZ company is a $10 billion company in 2030. All right, let's establish that. Let's talk about that. What are the 4 main areas that lead up to that? Trying to get that over the course of months, usually, right? Because they're not going to give that away immediately. You got to build trust. But I as the account lead, need to figure out what those things are and then bring the team along. Bring my solution architect, bring
Mm.
my technical account manager, bring my service leads across compute, database, storage, whatever it is, to that vision, right? And then get them excited about it, or else they're not going to want to join those meetings and help me to establish that next thing for that account.
Mm.
So and then to maintain the discussions with the executives, like the one-on-ones I was talking about, around each of those visions, like who owns this strategic area, right? Is it the chief operating officer? Who owns this one? Is it the CRO? Okay. And then I start to work with those guys. I like to do a lot of one-on-ones with these executives, right? I think they give away more and they talk more about what they're trying to do when it's a one-on-one situation. And then I bring the team into that, right? And I have a cadence call with the team every week. How are we driving towards that mission? What's the roadmap look like? What's the date when we need to actually deliver something? And all the milestones along the way. But I think I have to understand and know that vision of that company more than anybody else.
So your role is to help the company achieve their greatest level vision at the
Yeah.
executive C-suite and to use your resources and your team and deploy that team in
Yeah.
an effort to do that over multiple years.
If I don't understand what that is and where that company is going, then I'm not doing my job.
Hmm.
Is the way that it is, right? Because we can pretty much build or do anything for any customer.
Sure.
Fortunate to work for a company that can say that. But it's one thing to say it and one thing to believe it, and one thing to have the customer believe it, and then have your team believe it, right? Because my teammates have other accounts as well, and so they have to believe that what I'm doing is going to actually work because they get compensated on how we succeed as well. So I need to have and understand that vision and set it for the team and
Hmm.
bring them along and inspire them to continue to support that vision.
How big is your team? What does your extended team look like when you talk
I'm going
about that?
into a new account next year. They'll have like probably 30 or 40 people.
Wow. So you're the CEO of a 30 or 40
Yeah.
person organization that's assigned to an account to help the account achieve their greatest
Yeah.
level of success with AWS.
Yeah. It's going to take a while. I'm probably going to devote like 2 or 3 years to getting them to where they need to be, right? Taking them from 30 million to 60 million, probably by 2026 is the goal. So 2 years. So that's, yeah, it's a big target.
What's your cadence with your team to keep them on track and align with the vision and also hold your team accountable? How do you manage people that aren't a
I know that they're not direct
line
reports
to
to me,
you?
right?
They're a dotted line. So what do you do with the co-prime that has their head up there, somewhere else, or is working a different account, or maybe doesn't work at your same? I'm curious. Like you're intense. You're on it. Like you say you're going to do something. What if you assign something and they don't do it? How do you keep that team accountable? How do you manage people that don't necessarily work directly for you without being an HR, nightmare or whatever? Like, what does that really look like for you in practicality? Is it a weekly meeting with the core people that are active in opportunities, or is it something different, like just offline conversations? What is that extended team?
It's all of those, right? So we're on Slack, so we're slacking consistently. We do have cadence calls usually every week or biweekly. And then I try to give more once I learned a person's aptitude and reliability level. I try to give them as much leash as possible. I think people that have the ability and are pretty strong need that, like myself. If someone's like all over me and micromanaging, it just kind of pisses me off, right? I think most people are like that, and I've learned that over time. Like I wasn't very empathetic for my first like 5 or 6 years in sales, but I've learned that a lot, right? Give them the leash, understand where they're coming from, and how they want to work with you. And I think if you show that and then build that trust that way, then you'll get the results that you need. But then you have to continue to reinforce the vision, right? Where are we
Mhm.
going with this account? I know we're working on all these different things, but how does that align with the vision? We have this
Yep.
thing called the value map that has all the strategic, big rocks for each account. And then
Mhm.
what are all the things that we're working on to get to those? And so we like kind of bring those up every cadence call to kind of remind the team where we're marching towards.
Yeah, I love it. It's just it's very data driven. It's very factual. It's like here's what we're trying to do. Here's your responsibility. And just by having that regular weekly or biweekly meeting, it forces them to stay top of mind versus all the other AWS AEs that they might be assigned to. Right.
And one more thing that I do that I've done more in the last 5 years here is bringing leadership in more often, more proactively. I don't want them to ask to join something, which usually is not a good sign. So I
Mhm.
try to bring them into new relationships, and then I say, hey, I got this, but I wanted you to make sure you met them. I want them to have a line to you if something happens and we need to get support from way up the chain, right? Because there's a lot of money at stake, right? There's a lot of big things that could happen that could adversely affect their business and ours. So having that lifeline if they need it, but I'm leading everything, but I like to make sure they have that lifeline to leadership. So I've
Mhm.
begun to like include leadership like on a once a month cadence with each account. just to
Mm.
make sure they're aware of what's going on. But
How many accounts do you have?
I just have 5 right now.
You have 5 accounts. Well, even managing 5 in this capacity, it takes a ton of organization. And I think if I think about, well, to give everyone some context, how big are the contracts that you're working on or that you've done this year, just to kind of paint the picture of how
Have a
much
meeting.
on the
Yeah, have
line?
a meeting with one tomorrow. It's 60 million for 3 years. We did 95 million in Q3 with 2 accounts, and then a smaller one earlier this year for like 13 million. And those are kind of small by AWS. I mean, AWS has very large contracts with customers, but yeah, these are big investments for these customers, right? These are all billion-dollar companies.
So we're talking about 35 million for this year's spend, but we're talking about contracts that are multi-year in
Yeah.
the 9 figures in many cases.
Yep.
So it's a lot of money. That's a lot of like responsibility.
Yeah, and we're at,
Do you feel like, holy crap, like, some of these are 6-figure commissions, maybe more? Like what do you feel during those pressure moments, during the negotiations, because there's always hiccups, there's always like rocks that are thrown in this. Curious kind of how you're a pretty stoic guy and don't necessarily, you know, show much emotion. I'm curious, like how you handle that or how you think. Is it just process focused? Just do the process and whatever's going to happen, or do you really feel that craze of
I, I talk to my leadership a lot during these cycles, right? I pressure check everything that's happening, right? If I like, I had a deal with a company that's owned by private equity in September,
Mhm.
and there was a chance that legal wouldn't or would see the agreement and have red lines, and obviously cause things to slow down. And we had a timeline we had to hit September 30th. And so there was that concern, right? So I brought it to my boss. I'm like, hey, have you seen this before? Where have you seen it? How did you guys respond to it? We're all on the hook if we don't get this done. So, how should I be thinking about this? I think just being more communicative and getting ahead of things that might come up and understanding what those things are. I think it's like winning together versus winning on your own, and losing together versus losing on your own, right? You lose on your own, obviously it's all because of everything that you didn't do, right? And you missed. So I try to bring everybody in, and so we're all thinking about things from a different perspective, and we might see things that could come up and then get ahead of it. So I think I've learned more to be very open with everybody about what's going on as deals are getting closer to happening.
You win as a team, you lose alone.
Yeah.
Typically, you
Yeah. Yep.
you're responsible, and it's air cover, so they can't say what's happening here. What's happening? Well, you were with me. No change, right? It's they're doing their process. They're in
Yeah, the
league.
old Salesforce updates that you get pinged on every
Yeah. So talk
every
about you. So you came from AWS now,
Yep.
5 years, hit his number every year at AWS, which is huge. 5 years in a row. That's massive, man. Um, you came from Salesforce. It was a different experience. Before that, Fuse. Before that, EMC. Before that, Rico and Konica Minolta. Talk to me about how the AWS sales approach is different from anywhere you've ever worked before in terms of how they think about sales specifically, and why, in your opinion, is that so effective?
Well, first of all, it's not a sales organization. So we don't have sales trips. We don't have really a sales kickoff that's rah and exciting, which I miss. But I think that's really put us in the best spot as far as the major cloud providers out there. Because it really even, Amazon's number one leadership principle is customer obsession. I mean, that really does ring true. It's like maniacally focused across our team on the business outcome that the customer wants to achieve. And that, I think, has engendered a culture that customers have grown to like, which is, my reps aren't trying to push something on me. They're not trying to force something that's unnatural.
Mhm.
They really work hard to understand like what we're trying to do and then fit whatever the solution is to that. Um, and so before in copiers and in Salesforce even, right? You're trying to sell as many seats as you can. You want to obviously sell to the whole company, even though
You
like
don't
only
just
one
sell seats,
department
you have
uses
to
it.
sell up front. So even if they're not necessarily using those
Yeah.
seats,
And
it's
then
always,
you get shelfware, pissed
yeah.
off customers, attritions, right? So here it's like you really just need to understand very deeply where the customer is going, and then they tend to just keep doing more with us as a result of just that perception that we're not just selling to them.
You use a financial modeling, I think that's pretty unique in terms of the EDP structure and the mapping that takes historical data of growth and shows them the value of committing to go all in with Amazon. Can you kind of talk? I know you've done several of these this year. Can you kind of talk about what that process looks like in terms of how you're thinking or modeling a proposal based on a financial
Yeah, and this, yeah,
story, I guess?
yeah, and even though we're a run rate business, it can apply to really any sales. I think it's looking at historical trend of spend, right, and then forecasting out the next 12 months, next 24, 36, 48 months with growth included, right? And that growth is always the negotiation with the customer, right? Because we want them to grow at least 20 or 30% per year. And this year, as I'm sure a lot of people in sales have experienced, it's been a tough year. And so getting them to commit to that much growth, even though their business might be flatlined, is not easy. So we really go back to like, all right, what's happening with the business? You know, are you opening up a new region? Do you have a new product line that's coming? Generative AI, right? Where is that being infused into your software, into your shop floor, into your financial modeling, right? To make things
Hmm.
move faster, improve productivity, and then ultimately improve revenue. Where are all these things playing in? And then we would get them to walk through with us all these different projects that are happening, right? All right, now how does that tie into AWS revenue? Okay, so that's 500K in 2025. All right, let's factor that in. So getting them to go back to their business challenges and problems and outcomes that we know are real because we've already been talking to them for a while. And
Mhm.
then getting them to say, hey, look, you know, we have 3 million more of revenue in 2025 that could be happening. Let's take half of that and put that in the commit. Because the higher the commit gets them a higher percentage, it behooves them to have, you know, confidence in committing to more. So we just really need to have that transparency for them to share that information and then commit to it. So that takes a lot of going back and forth. Like this one I'm working on, I have a call tomorrow about it. It's been 9 months of working on it to get to like where we are right now. And we should have a commitment tomorrow, like what they were comfortable doing. But that's kind of the biggest part of it is like figuring out what projects we can do together and then them committing to have the confidence to actually spend money on it and put it into a contract. And if they don't hit that number, they still have to pay us. So it's a big deal to get that right.
It's really about the economics of it too, and a combination of just getting them to see it themselves. Because if you know if you're in out high, wide, and deep in the business, then you can say, well, actually, what about this? We heard about this
Yeah.
from this department, or what about this? And you can bring it up and then let them conservatively do it and say, look, if you continue buying at this normal for these areas, you're going to pay this. But if you commit now, you're actually
Yep.
going to save, $10 million over the next 5 years, and letting them kind of have that choice to stay on run rate versus do the EDP and make it a no-brainer for the EDP. Is that
Yeah, and it goes back to like working with the business and having various things that we've talked about incorporated into that business case, right? Like we know PeopleSoft is going to be coming up in 6 months. Let's
yeah.
build that in. Let's move that over. Like
Hmm.
knowing all the systems that are happening and being used in different parts of the business and like understanding
Yeah.
when those timelines are and then building that into the plan.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's strategic selling at its core, man. It's definitely tell me how you get out of the business, because I know a lot of people. We got people at Snowflake, AWS, we got GCP here, we got Databricks, and a lot of the things that I hear is we're in IT, it's technical. IT keeps us locked in. How do you use CIOs or executives in IT to get to the business without them trying to, say this is my lane, I'll take care of it, I'll talk to the business. I'm curious if you've had any kind of
no,
tension
that's
or
super big problem for us, right? Like that's what we are. We're a technology company. Ultimately, it goes right back to the CEO. The CIO needs to be bought in, right, to
Mhm.
everything that's going to be done. But they're not going to do things unless they're ultimately or unless they're really critical to their part of the business. But if the business comes to them with something that needs to be done, they kind of have to fall in line. So
Sure.
I'll just go to the business a lot of times and start and say, hey, look, we're working on these things with you. They'll typically go back to the CIO and say, hey, why is this guy reaching out? But he seems to know a good amount about our business. Maybe we should talk, right? Sometimes there's some ruffled feathers, of course, right? Um, or conversely, I'll try to build that relationship with the CIO to the point where they'll advocate for us to the business. And that's been happening more. But it's taken time to get to that point, right? With those people, like usually six
What do you
months.
do when their feathers are ruffled and they say, go through me next time? What do you, because they're not throwing out AWS, it's a big investment and it's
Yeah.
running their business a lot of times. So curious kind of how you handle that explanation. How do you explain to them why you're going direct to the business when they think this is my responsibility and this guy's going to create more work for me? Because the reason you go to the business is so you get the business to go to IT versus IT saying, I'm
Yeah.
doing these things, don't give me more, don't put more
We
on your.
just, yeah, we just go back to bottom line versus top line, right? Like he's responsible for controlling the bottom line. He has, from his board, he has a mandate to reduce IT costs by 20%. Like we all hear that all the time. So I say, hey, look, no, we totally understand that. We are helping you optimize consistently your costs and your operating structure on AWS. Same time, we need to focus on top line, right? What are new products that are coming out for the business? What's innovation that's happening at the company, right? What are those things that are really interesting for that the business would know more about that maybe can help you as well, right? Because it allows you to show that you're bringing innovation in through IT. So who from the business, might be good to talk about? Typically, it's like product owners, right? Chief product officer, revenue officer. Who's responsible for go to market for the company? Like, what are some of these things that affect top line that we can really dive into? And here's where we've done it before, right? And we've done it before with a lot of different companies in your space. We go back to that industry tie-in, right? We've done this many times. And all the big companies can say that, right? You guys have references all over the place. So you can say, hey, look, we've done this before related to a new product development release. This is what it drove for the company.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I found, and like you just said, CIOs are saying reduce spend. They're saying go, do less, and you're tasked with go do
So
more. You're
I
not
mean,
going, you're not going through the actual active making sure that you're talking to the people that need to do more and are responsible with the growth. Then you're going to be shut down if you're just taking that direction. So when it comes to funding, this is a technology spend. How does it come out of the CIO's budget that they're supposed to reduce by 20% if the business is saying we have this new product we want to launch and we want to run it on AWS? What's the actual mechanics of who's funding that? Because some people think IT is funding it, but in the reality, it's actually getting funded a lot of times by the business. So maybe you can elaborate on that a little more.
Well, it's happening right now with one of my accounts. Like, it's this product that the CIO had shot down a year ago with another group that I was working with in the business.
Yeah.
And I went to another business line, met the guy. He's excited about doing this engagement. And I told him, I'm like, hey, I'm excited to help you here too. Our team is ready to support it. We've kind of already done this motion with this other group. However, this is what happened. And I said, hey, look, Chris, the CIO, he already said, you know what, we're doing this another way. Thank you, but no thank you. And I said that to him, and he's like, well, you know what? I don't care. I don't care what he thinks. If we want something, he's gonna get in line. It's our P&L. So I think more often than not, it's the business unit profit and loss that or budget that can drive additional spend, even though the CIO has a mandate to keep things at a certain level.
Mhm. I think that's important for everyone to note, right? If someone says they don't have the budget, they may not have the budget, but another group does, especially with these large companies. So you got to find where the money's coming from, and the money's coming from the strategic initiatives. The money's coming from the growth areas that the executives are talking about. So if you're not talking to those executives and you're just relying on the CIO, even if you're selling a core technical product like AWS or cloud services, you're missing the opportunities for the growth. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I would say in a lot of these companies, the CIOs are still not really asked their opinion about strategic things.
Mm.
They're still a lot of times being thought of as like someone that just keeps the lights on, someone that just has the systems like in a closet somewhere, right? And someone that whose opinion doesn't matter as much as like a product person or a marketing person or a salesperson. So I think that's still like a lot of, and so they don't know a lot about what's going on in the business, I think sometimes. So the
Mhm.
business has to go to them and say, hey, look, we need this done because of this. Let's find some budget.
Mhm. Yeah, it makes sense. They're not even in the loop. They're getting the orders later. So the CIOs, purchasing, legal, security, they're all shared services that are their customer is the business, sales, marketing, operations, right? Product. I think it's important to understand that role so that when someone says stay with me and they're stuck in IT, that's because they don't understand what the business is doing sometimes. And they have their responsibilities and they're often overwhelmed with just what they have on their plate. So they can't take on
Yep.
more stuff.
Very reactive, right? They're break fix things that come up, tickets. employee morale is low because they're just fixing problems all day, putting out fires. So a lot of times they're not able to think big enough to where the business is going in these larger initiatives
Yeah.
that need to be supported. So
I love it, man. What about the CFO? When and if do you get involved with the CFO when these big $90 million contracts come and
I have a CFO meeting on
CIO
Monday.
versus the
Yeah.
CIO? Is the CIO doing negotiations? Is he passing to the CFO? Curious kind of what that looks like.
They're usually a checkbox at the end of most engagements. They're not too involved in discovery and those types of things as you can imagine. But I actually have a meeting with one this coming Monday, because he wants to be more involved in what IT is doing. Not like as a whip, but just to understand why things are being done and how it's going to affect the business. So I think they are getting more involved, but we don't work with them enough, I would say. We should involve them more.
Yeah, it's kind of a tail end. They're approving and then they need to make sure. Do you guys have a business case motion that you use, like a BVS team? And are you
We
bringing
do.
in a
Business
team
value.
from?
Yeah. Yeah, we have a cloud economics team, same kind of thing. We bring them in to really understand why we're doing something and what the business implications are,
Do you
TCO, et
use them a
cetera.
lot for your contracts? Is that like a must-have for any of your big deals, the
Yeah,
business?
anything over 50 million, like automatically like ties someone from that team to it just to make sure that we're all thinking about things the right way and
Mhm.
have a better chance of getting that deal done because
Yeah,
we're putting the numbers together properly. Yeah.
cool. So the last question, I want to open up to the group in a couple minutes. Uh, what qualities do you possess that you think have made you very effective in this specific role?
Okay. I thought you were going to
Yeah,
keep going.
I was going to keep going. My second part was like, have those changed at all? Have you evolved, like how you show up, knowing that you have such a big job? You know,
I think the biggest thing is I've slowed down. Like, I don't think it's as critical to respond to people immediately, right? And I think that shows a little bit of mutual respect. Before I would like a customer would email, I'd respond immediately. Like, I don't know, it shows a little bit of desperateness, I guess. That's one thing. Two things I think I've just maintained the same discipline around being organized, rigor around follow up. Like every meeting that I have, I send a follow up note. Generative AI has helped with consolidating notes and sending follow ups easier, of course. But
mhm,
yeah, every meeting I have is a follow up, has a detailed next steps, timelines for everything, owners from the customer end for my team, who's going to do what. So that I've maintained that. I mean, I was lucky to learn that like my first year in sales, like just the ability to do the activity, organize everything properly, do the follow up. I think the other thing is like I said before, being more empathetic to teammates and not having to be involved in everything, taking a step back. You know, I like to control all the processes, right? As you know,
yeah,
but I've learned to step back and let people do what they do better than me. You
yeah,
know,
not be a control freak.
and then to that point though, when people are not performing to what they need to be doing, escalating quickly
Yeah.
and understanding how to do that in an artful way and not piss people off. It's not easy to do.
Mm.
So just like bringing people into the loop that need to be involved and see people that are not performing and then take action if needed. But it's rare because we
Yeah.
hire pretty talented people.
I think what you possess is like you don't miss a beat, man. Like Theo knows all my kids' birthdays and other people and random facts, and you're just like super detailed and thorough, and your memory is really sharp. Like, and I think that like next steps and follow up, and this person said this, I think all of that fuels into like massive knowledge really channeled towards your customer and in terms of what they're trying to do, what's going on in their company, what your team is doing. Would you think it's not even project management, but it's just this massive ability to see the big picture and know where all the moving parts are and synthesize and really make all of that move in unison. And I think that's a unique skill set. You call it organization, but I think it's bigger than that. I think it's the ability to be really thorough and detail oriented and be able to, not have things slip through the cracks.
Yeah, I think I listen more than I talk. I think that's a big part of it, right? In these calls, I try to shut up and take in as much as I can, and then what I do that a lot of people I don't think do that well is I organize all my thoughts and notes from that, and in doing so, I internalize it for future conversations. It comes up again, and I already know about it, and the customer will share more because I've actually listened. I think
Mhm.
that's a big part of it too. But yeah,
Mhm.
it helps to have a good memory, of course, those types of things. But I think yeah, just listening a lot, asking a ton of questions, trying to understand what's most important to that person specifically too. Like
Yeah.
what's their next role or what are they trying to get out of this? And that really endears you to them, you know?
Yeah, just what the success looked like, not just for their company, but for them individually. We talked about that yesterday a lot, right? Just their personal motivation, their personal why. Um, for you, what's the main driver for sales in terms of like fueling your success? You're so driven, you're so motivated, you're doing this now 22 years straight, right? How does sales kind of help you in your personal pursuit of dreams and goals? And for everyone, that's our last question. So put your hands up. You can ask Theo whatever you want afterwards. We'll take it in order. I saw Michael earlier, but I just want to wrap up with like how
Yeah.
you view sales as fuel or as fodder for your broader life, world
Yeah.
domination.
I think it's simply lifestyle, right? Work-life balance. Like at this point, I have two young kids. I can go to all their games. I can coach their sports teams. I can pick them up from school. I can take them to school if I need to. I will move my schedule to accommodate family, no matter what.
Mhm.
And having the trust of my leadership and having performed, um, that's that's what it's enabled, right? Over 21 years, like doing fairly well the whole time. And family is always first. So just the ability, I think that's the thing is like giving time back, right? Because we all have the same amount of time. So if you can use your time more effectively, have a richer life because of the income that you're making and the customers that you're working with. I think that's the point of why we're here. So I think
I
that's the
love
main
it.
thing. And then starting a side business as well and
Well,
gradually going over to that at some point.
you own multiple properties, but that's kind of like the big picture is using
Yeah.
sales to be able to fund.
Passive income and then ultimately maybe do some building and my wife likes to design the places that we get and things like that. But yeah, that's probably a few years out. But yeah, this enables that other passions to also be fostered.
I think it's important just to stay in the game, to stay in the grind, to continue to perform year after year. You have to have sales be the fuel for either lifestyle or your own business or your own, family. I think otherwise it becomes a dreadful, it can
Oh,
be, yeah,
burnout's going to happen
you'll
automatically. Yeah,
burn
definitely.
out if you don't have that deep clarity on why you're doing it. So we have a few questions in the chat. I want people to again come on camera if you're able to. Michael, you talked about Michael Ryswick. I don't know if you're still there, but it says, I'd love to hear about how you go about selling internally. I think he's referencing selling the team on the big
Yeah.
vision for what AWS can do in this account and getting them all bought in so they all work really hard on your account.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
oh, well, sorry, go
Go,
on.
go ahead, Michael.
Well, you touched on some of it already, Theo, so thank you. But for those of us maybe in smaller orgs, right? Like we're no AWS, right? So we do have maybe limited resources, or we have like very rigid SOPs, like, oh, no, you can't talk to that person, or no pricing thresholds, or whatever, right? And we all know there's never an enterprise deal or strategic deal that fits exactly according to our, plan. So just speak to briefly how you navigate internally if a deal requires like making an exception to some of these SOPs internally, things like that.
I think having the solid story about why we're even doing this project, right? So this is gonna help this customer, with whatever the revenue target for next year is. It's also gonna help them, move more productively towards, whatever the future is for a product line. I think having that story and being able to succinctly and crisply write it down to people within the org, um, and share what this is also going to do for our company, right? It's going to increase the spend of that company 10% for you for whoever your company is. I think just having that story and being able to vocalize it properly, I think is the key to getting support. Because if there's no like clear reason for why we're doing something, then yeah, you're not going to get the resources that you need. Easier said than done sometimes, right? Like if I want help from like and I'm in AWS, if I want help from like Amazon ads, I have to like have a certain threshold of potential spend. I have to write a paper about it. It's not easy in those cases. But if you have a clear story and then you have like even business case metrics to back it up, I think that's the key.
Yeah, I love it. Half the battle is selling internally, and you got to
It's
believe
more, yeah, that's
what
more
you're
of what I
doing.
spend time on than I than with customers. It's easier with the customers.
That's right.
So,
Rosa, you're next. I see your question in the chat. Why don't you ask it?
Hi, thanks so much. Yeah, I particularly with the greenfield accounts that you mentioned, wanted to hear about your approach when they say stuff like, "Oh, we're a Microsoft shop," or Google's giving us a lot of credits and stuff like that. Like, how do you earn trust in those situations and get the opportunity to demonstrate value?
it's a very good question. I would just try to find out more about where those relationships came from. I'd say that's great. They're both good companies. They're in the same space as we are. Um, what are you doing with them if they'll share, right? Like what kind of business problems are you working on with them? Maybe it's just one little thing, but they think it's pervasive, right? Maybe it's just one business area that's using Azure, one business unit that's using GCP. That's fine. We work in multi-cloud environments all the time. I would just go back to asking them questions about, how they got in that situation. Did they have a bad experience with us before? That obviously happens too. So I think just understanding more and asking a lot of questions about how that perception came to be is where I would focus. And then if it's not the right time because of contracts or whatever else, then we can regroup later. And it goes back to like, okay, that's fine. We could definitely help, but it goes back to like the being non-salesy and taking the reverse psychology approach. And sometimes that'll work, but it may not be a good fit. But I'd want to understand more about
These
whatever.
companies are so big too that a lot of them have multi-cloud environments. For companies to say we're only Azure, only GCP, or only AWS worldwide is probably rare,
It's
Theo.
rare. Yeah, it's very rare
I'm
these days.
guessing you have other competitors in.
Every account has either two or three, it seems like at this point, or most.
Yeah, there's plenty of cloud. There's plenty of cloud real estate to go around, really. Let's take, it looks like the next question. Theo, I just want to be mindful of time. Do you have a hard stop in 3 minutes, or you can stay a few
I can
minutes?
go a few minutes longer. It's fine.
Okay, cool. So we have bunch of people asking questions. So the next is from Michelle McGlennon. Michelle is asking, you've been consistent in AWS, which is amazing. Congrats. Have you ever failed before in meeting quota in previous roles? And if so, what was the big shift that you made to get the consistency that you have now?
Yeah, Salesforce was a challenge. I came into a challenging account, to be honest. One account that had a big attrition on the radar. And my boss was also challenging to deal with. Ian worked for him as well, so he can share that with you sometime.
He was a real blessing in disguise, wasn't he? I left the team and I ended up having
I
great
know.
success afterwards. So it looked.
He told me, he's like, yeah, I guess I blew it on that one about you. But
Only 2 years, I really missed it. That was. I don't want to say anything. I won't.
yeah.
In case he's watching.
So to answer the question more, so I was in that role. It did not work out. He and I could not align. He thought I wasn't ready for. He said I was over my skis. Like didn't know how to handle like an account like that. I wasn't ready for it. This is like 6 or 7 years ago. So I ended up having to go to like an inside rep role there with ECS, Ian, which was basically like a second seller for accounts. And that definitely shot my confidence. Like I wasn't really leading much. I had to check in with the core rep on deals. So that was very challenging to deal with. I'm used to carrying my own deals and working my own engagements. And I was actually in that role and I had my second kid and I was on paternity leave when AWS reached out. So how did I handle that? I guess I didn't handle it very well. I left Salesforce. I was thinking about moving to a different position within Salesforce, but AWS came with a good offer. And then Fuse, I didn't really do that well there. It was partly because it was a startup that ended up failing. And there it was a struggle really selling the company because we didn't have a track record. We weren't public, didn't have any financials to share. And that was a challenging role too. So yeah, I've had a lot of challenges. I've had years where I didn't make the trip at Enrico and copier sales before. And then I would just double down on my fundamentals, right? I'd get back to activity, I'd get back to prospecting. That was always my answer. Having more in the pipeline typically solves problems. So
I love it, man. And it's just a testament to keep going because I didn't really break through until year 16, and you were really broke through in Amazon. So a lot of times it's just staying in the game long enough to find the right place, the right home, and develop the skills that make you worthy of making that kind of money. It doesn't come 2, 3 years in. So I love the answer. Let's take two more. So Laura, she's off camera, but she says, thank you for being here. How are you continuing to invest in yourself, and what resources do you recommend?
I read a ton. Most of these are business books, so I'm always reading business books, not just about selling or software or technology, but about business leaders and leadership in general. I was on the plane yesterday, and I was reading a leadership book, just trying to get better at working with people as I'm at this phase in my career. Like I probably will go into management at some point. It's nice being an IC because you're not, you kind of can lead your own journey, but I think management's the next phase and whatever that looks like for me. So I think just always reading books like that keeps me sharp, keeps my vocabulary sharp. I'm able to write better as far as emails and things of that nature. I like, obviously what Ian's doing. I've worked with other coaches and things like that. So I think you always need to have something like this to augment, your day job, right? Because you need to be open to different approaches and hear from different people that are having, problems in other industries, and you can learn from that.
Mhm.
So, but I think for me, reading is the biggest thing. I try to read a book or two every month about something.
And it's business too. It's like, it's not just that you're listening to podcasts. There's a founders
Yeah,
podcast too, right?
that's true. Yeah, I listen to like Motley Fool every day, and the Tape, and All In, and so yeah, I'm always listening to all these different podcasts as well. So yeah, I guess I'm kind of a nerd that way, but
I was going to bring that up because it's like you need to be, you're reading executive books, high level growth. You read all the bios of like Steve Jobs and all the big titans in business. And then you can bring that perspective to your clients. It's not just bringing the tech, it's bringing them like what you're hearing about the business and what you're listening to. And you're adding value beyond, you're helping them think bigger because you're thinking bigger.
Yeah, and speaking the language of business, right? Like through those podcasts and the books, I'm learning things that allow me to have an opinion with executives where I wouldn't normally before, and being able to talk their language, I think has really helped as well.
I
So
love it, man. Yeah, I was going to call that out earlier for sure, because that's just your passion. So it's like you love business and you love helping clients grow their business. And that's all these things that you're absorbing is going to infuse into how you engage with your customers and the value you bring. So last question is from Toby. Toby, I don't know if you can go on camera or not. I put you on the middle. If you want to ask your question, there he is.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Nice to meet you, Theo.
Toby.
I'm sure you've had like, and it seems like you're kind of like answered the question because you said it's kind of like the next phase of your career, but kind of, yeah, like why haven't you like gone into management previously? How are you thinking about that decision?
Yeah, that's a good question. And yeah, I think about it all the time. And I was in management briefly at Rico, which is another copier company, about 11 or 12 years ago. Excuse me. And I've thought about it again here, but I think it goes back to the freedom and lifestyle. Like I do like to do a lot with my kids and be around. I don't like to miss anything if I don't have to. And also I love being with customers. I see like especially at Amazon, as you go up the chain, you're like probably 40, 30, 20% of your time with customers. And ultimately you're only with customers at big events like reInvent, our conference that was just happening. So yeah, I love being customer facing. I love being on the front lines. I love like hearing about what their business is doing, and I don't know. I don't want to lose that, and that's part of the challenge with management. Management's more about right people and building up your team, which is also interesting, but I don't want to lose the customer aspect of it yet. Like here, my boss is rarely involved in my engagements. I'm leading pretty much everything. He's maybe involved in like 5% of my engagements. And I see that I'm like, I don't know if I want that here, maybe somewhere else. But I think it's the biggest thing is the customer and the family aspect of it.
Love it, man. Thank you, Toby. It's a great place to stop. And I want to thank you, Theo, for being here and for sharing your wisdom. Theo's the real deal. And I've seen the growth personally. I've seen the real estate and the changes in his house and just the lifestyle. It's beautiful to see what you're providing for your family and what you guys are able to do. And I'm very happy for you. If people want to follow along, or just if they have more questions, what's the best way for anyone to reach out or
Yeah,
get?
anybody can ping me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to chat. I love talking about areas where I may be able to help or just provide a perspective. But yeah, it's fun doing these kind of things. So thanks for having me.
Cool. We just put his LinkedIn profile in the chat for everyone. Theo, thanks for coming on, man. I will see you
Yeah.
on a Sunday
See you
for
on
the
Sunday. Yeah,
Christmas
nice to meet
party.
you all.
All right,
Thank
take
you
care,
guys.
everyone. Bye.